Margaret Mitchell sat with an older woman and did something that sounds small, but changes everything. She listened. She was not listening to a polished speech or a public legend. She was listening to a childhood friend describe a girl from Georgia who used charm like a weapon. This girl could light up a room, loved attention, and knew exactly how to get her way. The woman describing her was Evelyn King, and the girl she was talking about was Martha Bulloch Roosevelt, known to everyone as Midi. Years later, when millions of people met Scarlett O'Hara, they were meeting a shadow of Midi. If you skip this story, you pay a penalty. You keep thinking Scarlett O'Hara came only from fiction built out of thin air. The reward for knowing the truth is better. You get a real person behind the myth, a Southern belle who lived at Bulloch Hall in Roswell, Georgia, in the same Civil War mood that made Tara feel possible. Midi was not a copy or a perfect match, but she was a partial spark that helped Margaret Mitchell shape a character who still won't let go of our imaginations. Midi was born into a world with rules as tight as corset strings. She was raised in elite society tied to cotton plantations, a setting that builds the kind of young woman Scarlett becomes. When you grow up in a big house surrounded by status, you learn performance early. You learn when to smile and when to hide what you want. If you are bold, you learn how to get what you want anyway. Her nickname, Midi, sounds light and easy, like laughter on a porch. Her public image was clear, beautiful, spirited, and flirtatious. These words are not gentle. They point to a person who could bend a room with her personality. That kind of girl does not happen by accident. She is shaped by the place that raised her. Bulloch Hall was not just a building, but a stage where Midi learned how to be noticed. A plantation world is full of watchers, family, neighbors, men and women, and the whole system runs on reputation. Midi's first problem was the same one Scarlett faces: how to live inside a world that judges you every second. Her choice was not to shrink, but to lean into charm and fun. The consequence was that people remembered her long after the war, vividly enough for someone to paint her picture for Margaret Mitchell decades later. The Civil War tightened the story because it was not just background noise, it was the pressure that tested who someone really was. Midi had Confederate connections through her brothers, which meant her family life was tied to the side that would lose. That loss changed money, safety, and the way families talked. This is where Midi's comparison to Scarlett lives. A beautiful woman is easy to imagine when life is smooth, but resilience only shows up when there is something to endure. Midi could have been only decoration, a pretty name in a pretty house. Instead, she was resilient, meaning she did not collapse under the era's stress. Margaret Mitchell worked at the Atlanta Journal in the 1920s and profiled Evelyn King. She sought out a person who knew Midi as a child and listened for details. She captured the traits that stuck: charm, fun-loving nature, and beauty, and turned Midi's life into raw material. Scarlett O'Hara was originally named Pansy O'Hara, a small detail that reminds you the character was built from pieces. Midi is the piece people love because it is real and specific, a named woman at a named house in a named town. This is why Bulloch Hall draws visitors who want to believe fiction has a heartbeat they can touch. But Midi is not the final famous person in this story. Her son is. Midi becomes Martha Bulloch Roosevelt, and that last name pulls Theodore Roosevelt into the frame. The mother of a future president being compared to Scarlett O'Hara turns an old Georgia girl into a bridge between Southern myth and national power. Midi grew up at Bulloch Hall, faced the problem of a strict social world, and chose to be spirited rather than obedient. The consequence was a reputation so strong it traveled into the mind of a young writer named Margaret Mitchell. Most people think Theodore Roosevelt's story starts with a boy on a horse charging into history. They picture the rough rider with the big grin. But if you stop there, you miss the real hinge. The hinge is a young woman from Georgia, just 17, stepping into a world that could have rejected her on sight. Martha Midi Bulloch didn't ride into New York with an army. She walked in with a Southern accent and family ties that would soon pull her in the opposite direction of her husband's beliefs. If you don't know this, you believe something too simple, that the Roosevelts were one clean, united team. The truth is that Theodore Roosevelt's life was shaped by a marriage that bridged North and South right as the country was splitting apart. He was born into a family with money, but also into a family built from a risky match. His mother was a Southern belle, and his father was Theodore the Roosevelt Sr., a wealthy New York merchant from an abolitionist family. Abolitionists wanted slavery ended, a belief that was not a quiet opinion in the 1950s. It was a line that could split families. In that tense atmosphere, Thee fell deeply in love with Midi. They met around 1852 when Midi visited her sister in Philadelphia, placing a 17-year-old Southern girl in a city where she could meet Northern people without being on enemy ground. Thee was a New Yorker set in a wealthy life, yet he pursued a woman from a region he did not belong to. He courted her with letters and worked to win her mother's approval because marriage was between families, not just individuals. The stakes rose when Thee visited Roswell, Georgia. A wealthy abolitionist stepping into a Southern home was not a neutral act as the North-South divide sharpened. Yet Thee proposed, asking Midi to leave her world and trade warm Southern familiarity for Northern streets. Midi faced the problem of leaving a place where she belonged for a place where her accent would mark her. She chose to say yes. They married in Bulloch Hall's dining room on December 22, 1853. It was not a church aisle, but a dining room, making it feel close, like family eyes were watching every step. It was a public bridge in a time of rising division. Then came the move that tested everything. Midi went to New York. The Roosevelts received a brownstone at 28 East 20th Street as a wedding gift, a statement of wealth and a stage where Midi had to become Mrs. Roosevelt. She had to adapt to a new social world with different rules. Her choice was to bring her mother and sister with her, bringing pieces of home that softened the shock. Thee's problem was real. He was an abolitionist supporting the Union while married into a family with Confederate ties. That is an emotional minefield. His choice was to support the Union while respecting his wife's family, a balancing act that meant he did not crush her connections. The consequence was a marriage that held two truths at once. Theodore Roosevelt grew up in that household, watching a complicated kind of loyalty where love and disagreement sat in the same room. His father was the person who made the bridge possible by falling in love across a widening national crack. Theodore Roosevelt grew up as one of 4 children in a marriage that had to be managed, not assumed. Even if nobody lectured him, the split lived in what people said and did not say. This connection makes his story click. He became known for holding opposites together because his parents' marriage was a living mix of North and South. It showed him early that a person can belong to more than one world and still move forward. Midi and Thee created a private space where the divide did not destroy love. Theodore Roosevelt is remembered as a tough, loud, flag-waving Union man, but most people don't know the secret he carried. His own mother's brothers fought for the Confederacy. One helped build the Confederate Navy from Britain, and the other served on the most feared Confederate raider, the CSS Alabama. After the war, these men slipped back into Theodore's life under assumed names, charming him like nothing had happened. Theodore's childhood home held a quiet divide, and the boy in the middle had to make sense of it long before he ever ran the country. The Bulloch family split along sectional lines, meaning real consequences and secrets. Midi lived in New York as the country tore itself apart and did something risky. She secretly sent supplies south. New York was a Union center, so sending supplies was a choice that showed how deep her ties ran. Her half-brother, James Dunwoody Bulloch, became the Confederacy's chief naval agent in Britain, overseeing blockade runners and raiders to disrupt Union shipping. Her full brother, Irvine Stevens Bulloch, was the youngest midshipman on the CSS Alabama, living the danger day by day at sea. In 1864, the Alabama fought the Battle of Cherbourg and sank. Irvine Stevens Bulloch fired its final shot before it went down. This detail places him at the very end of a famous Confederate weapon. Both brothers survived the war but were denied amnesty, meaning they could not live openly in the United States. James directed a nautical college in Liverpool, and Irvine lived in England until 1898. But the famous person stays active in the story. Shortly after 1865, James and Irvine visited Theodore under assumed names. They had to hide who they were, but they still wanted to see family. Theodore knew them as Uncle Jimmy and Uncle Irvine, learning that a person can be loved and controversial at the same time. The divide didn't end with the men. Midi's mother mourned the South's loss until her death in 1864, so grief lived in the house. Older sister Anna helped preserve Southern traditions in the home. Theodore grew up with two cultures under one roof, building an identity where his roots argued with each other. His family forced him to live with both sides as human beings, not slogans. When he later tried to pull people together, it wasn't just strategy. He had lived the split at the dinner table. He learned that people can be loyal in different directions and still be family. Theodore Roosevelt did not walk up San Juan Hill like a man taking a casual stroll. He went up like the hill owed him an answer. There was a private fuel behind that public moment, a family wound he could never fully show. His father, Thee, was a staunch Lincoln Republican who supported the cause, but when the draft came in 1863, he faced a choice. He could go into combat or hire a substitute. The law allowed a drafted man to pay $300 for someone else to serve, and Thee used it. He hired Abraham Graff to go in his place. Thee refused combat partly because of family loyalty. Fighting for the Union meant risking fighting against his wife's brothers. He also had poor health, but the regret stayed with him until his death. He felt he had failed to serve directly, and he told his young son that the choice haunted him. This confession handed a child a problem he could not fix, and a mission he could not ignore. These served in other ways, founding the Union League Club and helping soldiers' families, but for him, it did not erase the sting of not going in uniform. Young Theodore adored his father but heard the message, "Duty is everything, and I failed it." Thee urged his son to always fight if duty called. As Theodore grew, he trained himself into bravery, pushing his body and chasing challenge. This drive came from a father who learned that buying an exit did not feel like freedom. When Theodore Roosevelt became an adult, he embraced toughness and made sure people saw him as a man who would not pay someone else to face danger. In 1898, he went to war, joined the fight, and charged at San Juan Hill. He was a son trying to answer a confession with action, making sure that if duty ever called, no one would have to go in his place. On Valentine's Day in 1884, Theodore Roosevelt drew an X across a diary page and wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." He was 25, a New York assemblyman with a new baby daughter. In a single day, in the same house, he lost the two women who mattered most. At 3 a.m., his mother Midi died of typhoid fever. Hours later, at 2 p.m., his wife Alice died of Bright's disease. She had given birth 2 days earlier, and the illness was undiagnosed until it was too late. One day meant love notes for most people. For Roosevelt, it meant 2 deaths and a silence that followed him for years. He had rushed from Albany, expecting a house full of joy, but found both women dying. Midi had caught typhoid while nursing Alice, a sharp fact that shows a mother caring for her son's wife even as danger hit. Roosevelt faced an impossible problem, watching his world slip away in hours. His choice was to disappear. He never spoke of Alice again, sealing the pain in silence. He left his newborn daughter with his sister Bamie and fled west to his Dakota ranch. This was not a vacation. It was an escape from the house at 57 West 57th Street that held too much grief. The tragedy forged his resilience. The day destroyed the young husband with a bright future, and in his place emerged a man who learned how quickly life can cut. He learned not to depend on calm. While his mother's final act was care, Roosevelt's reaction was retreat, a different survival instinct. He created a pattern of silence, keeping whole rooms locked inside his mind while moving in public. When he returned from the West 2 years later, he was a harder man, the one history later watched climb. Theodore Roosevelt stood in a country still sore from the Civil War and did something surprising. He carried pride from both directions. He was not just a Union man from New York. His drive to reconcile was fed by a mother who never stopped being loyal to the South. Midi was an unreconstructed Confederate until she died, meaning she never renounced her heritage even after living in New York for 30 years. She told vivid stories about the Old South, romanticizing it as dignified and courteous. These stories were an inheritance that made the South feel real to her children. Midi's loyalty was more than talk. She had secretly smuggled supplies south because her brothers were in danger. This secret created a hidden current in the house, teaching children that love can pull against public loyalty. Midi chose to keep her culture alive, so the South stayed in her voice and in the relatives who shared the space. Her mother and sister reinforced these traditions, so Theodore heard a chorus of Southern identity. He cherished his half-Southern blood and took pride in Southern deeds. This mixture could have made him bitter, but instead, it pushed him toward reconciliation. His pride in his heritage fueled his efforts to pull the nation together. He lived with the split at his dinner table, where the war's sides were loved people, not faceless enemies. Theodore learned to speak to both sides because he carried both. He understood the danger of turning history into hate because the people on the other side were family. In 1901, Roosevelt wrote something that still makes people blink. He said he was extremely proud that one uncle was a Confederate admiral and another fired the last gun on the Alabama. Then he said all of us can be proud of the valor shown on both sides. He did not hide the family story that could start a fight. He put it on the page to push for unity. He faced the problem of how to honor loved ones when the country said they were wrong. He chose to claim the whole inheritance. He pointed to his uncles, James and Irvine, whose roles were not neutral. They were deep in the Confederate fight, yet Roosevelt claimed pride in their deeds while also believing in the Northerner. He used the word valor, meaning bravery in danger, to let people hold on to pride without demanding the other side be fake. He was telling Southerners he respected them and telling Northerners they could not erase these people. This confidence came from living with a mother's Southern pride and a father's Union loyalty. Roosevelt built symbols to match his words. His Rough Riders regiment contained more sons of Confederate veterans than Union ones. He led men whose fathers had fought each other, pointing to that mix as a sign of healing. He could say, "Look, this is what oneness looks like." He praised Southern courage not to reopen the fight, but to close it without humiliation. He asked America to stop living inside the war. If you think America's divisions are new, the Roosevelt story corrects you fast. The penalty for not knowing it is turning Theodore Roosevelt into a cartoon of confidence. The reward is seeing that his hunger for unity was built inside a family split so sharp it forced secrets and disguises. He was a child watching adults carry beliefs like loaded weapons. His mother's brothers were exiled. His father was haunted by a substitute. Theodore Roosevelt didn't just inherit a famous name. He inherited a divided map, and he spent his life trying to draw a circle around the whole thing so it wouldn't break again.